That is what is called in current debt. So they approach the bank, and the bank says we could finance up to 1.3 million. They put that down with the dealer, and they get a car that they could manage. Based upon their savings, they add to that, and they move on. Dr. Ashley Singh, the PPPC administration, and yes, the financial economic whiz of the Caribbean, Dr. Barrett Jagdeo, we have analyzed our financial situation. We have looked at the various streams of revenue. We have looked at the sectors that are performing, the ones that need injection. We have looked over the 5-10-year period, what Guyana should look like, and if we don't make those interventions now, how much it will cost us to catch up if we don't do it now. And when we weigh and we measure all of those things, we say, you know what we have to do? We have to look and explore possibilities. Tonight's activity in the National Assembly is not the borrowing of the money. It's creating the space to give the finance minister and his team the negotiating capacity and the wherewithal that he could sit with possible financiers and possible donors and lenders, that we could discuss Guyana's development and we can make the necessary adjustment, whether it's at the local market or on the international market. So, to say that you are opposing this bill, Mr. Speaker, is to tell the people of Guyana, because we are not in government, we don't want development. It is what I call, in a previous debate, don't cut your nose and spoil your face. And a certain gentleman retorted he already had his nose cut. But Mr. Speaker, this is about our future. It's not about putting pressure on our children and our grandchildren. It's opening up avenues, opportunities. As a country, in 1992, we were a highly poor, indebted country. That was our status. When we attended forums and participated internationally, we were in the bracket, highly poor, indebted country. In 2014, 2015, when we left government, we were a middle income country. The management of the PPPC. And by the way, for all the people who are doing the scaremongering, we had available to us the possibility of borrowing up to 150 billion, and over the 2-year period, we did not borrow 150 billion. So the first thing the minister is seeking to do tonight, and he said it, is that he wants to regularize the books. Because the APNU, AFC, and the gentleman that the Honorable Member Guy, Paul wants to bring back, he borrowed, he created liabilities, he put us in debt, and he didn't put it on the books that reflect debt. It was hidden in all forms of machinations that you are still yet to describe. And I want to remind the people of Guyana, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, the total budgets was over $1.1 trillion. And there is not one single transformative project that the APNU AFC got to show the people of Guyana what they did with $1.1 trillion. Not one. Not one. So you could criticize Skeldon, because there is a Skeldon. You inherited the airport project You sat with some people and give away 23 million US. Or I don't know if you collected it, but at least 23 million US was removed from the contract. The airport that we inherited is not one that was conceptualized. We now have a new agreement because we understand the importance of a modern state-of-the-art airport. We were able to broker a deal with the same contractors who got 23 million for them to put in 2 extra access air bridges and a corridor to do the curtain, to create the facade of beauty and excellence, and to create a new ambience to show how Guyana is progressing. Watch it, you will like it. We're not borrowing money to eat. We're not borrowing money for Grey Goose. We're not borrowing money for cheese straws and stuffed eggs and banquets. Check the APNU AFC budgets, people of Guyana. Dietary was a major and significant increase. Sports for the boys. We're not borrowing for that. We are ensuring that we could cut travel time to the airport at least by half, because we're going to bring the first 4-lane highway from Ogle to Eccles, and then from Eccles to Diamond, and then from Diamond to Tamiri. We are borrowing. If you want to talk about borrowing, we are borrowing to build a road to Lethem. It's no longer a feasibility study, and I heard Minister Ferguson, former Minister Ferguson, honorable member, talking about where is the feasibility studies. Well, let me tell you, we are not just looking merely at a road. We are looking at about a rail with in an accompanying alignment that we could move containerized cargo into northern Brazil through that same alignment where we are building a road. We are talking about the possibility of getting a diversionary road coming off of Linden through Ichuni into Berbice, that the container trucks don't have to come all the way to town and then go back to Berbice, linking it with a deep water harbor. That's what we're talking about. The budget is coming soon. Things are happening. So people of Guyana, I call upon you, members of this National Assembly, rally with us in the PVPC. Support the measures being put in place by my colleague, Dr. Ashley Singh. Support this motion, both to increase our local capacity to borrow and our capacity to borrow externally, because we're not funding clothes and parties and Bujubantan tickets. We are funding real development, opportunities for the future, and modernizing Guyana. Let us go back to classes and get some comprehension. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for your impeccable timing. I thought I would have to borrow some time to you. Honorable Member, Dr. Ashni Singh.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to conclude the debate on this motion with very mixed feelings. When I opened the debate on this motion, I started out by explaining why we needed to increase the ceilings on domestic and external debt. And I did so outlining both the dismal legacy that we inherited, which was cause for a somber mood. But I also outlined the fact that we acknowledge that implementing the development plans of the future will involve new borrowing. And my expectation, sir, was that any elected representative of the people, anybody who would want to present themselves as a legitimate representative of the people, would see the merit of standing on the side of development. Alas, sir, having listened to my colleagues on the other side of the house, I am filled, sir, having listened to my colleagues on the other side of the house, I am filled, sir, with sadness. Because, sir, this Parliament is a serious place. It's a place where each one of us has a responsibility to come and speak truthfully, to advocate the interests of the people whom we represent, to analyze issues in an objective and factual manner, to desist from distortions and misrepresentation. And most importantly, sir, not to lower the Parliament to some kind of amateur dramatic stage where we come and dramatize some fictional play in which that we have conjured in our minds. And I'll come back to why I say that. Mr. Speaker, let me first of all elaborate on why we are where we are with respect to the need to remedy the situation that we inherited with respect to the staggering overdraft that was inherited. I refer, sir, to the 2018 International Monetary Fund Article 4 consultation. As members of this House should know, every year the IMF conducts an assessment of the economy of the countries who are members of the fund. This is a commitment that all member countries have accepted and undertaken. And every year, big and small, all the economies of all member states of the fund are subject to this Article 4 consultation. Let me read, sir, what the 2018 report on the Guyanese economy said. I refer here to Article 4 consultation, 2018, dated July 2000. Mind you, sir, this is not Bishop Edgell speaking, Minister Edgell speaking, Minister Indar speaking, the honorable ministers. This is the International Monetary Fund. The 2018 report reads thus: domestic financing options remain limited. At present, domestic debt consists of short-term treasury bills. The government has maintained an outstanding balance at the central bank of about 6% of GDP at end March 2018, from 3% at end 2016, and 3.5% at end 2017. And I pause to repeat. From 3% at end 2016, 3.5% at end 2017, 6% at end March 2018. This is the very overdraft with the staff, this is the IMF staff, includes this overdraft in the debt figures of this report. These operations provide limited benefits in terms of reduced borrowing cost, since the interest rate on the treasury bills issued for monetary policy operations is paid by the treasury. Staff reiterated this is policy advice being provided by the preeminent international financial institution. Staff reiterated and stressed the importance of settling these balances at the central bank, which the authorities agreed to do in the short term through issuance of treasury bills. Central bank financing should not be used at all. That, sir, was in July 2018. 1 year later, sir, in September 2019, mind you, I just read that the authorities indicated their intention to take action. In September 2019, in the IMF's 2019 staff report on the Guyanese economy, this is what the International Monetary Fund had to say about the state of the public finances in Guyana. The domestic bond market should be developed further, following 2017 technical assistance recommendation, in order to enhance financial intermediation. And here is the important part. The government had accumulated an overdraft balance at the central bank of 9% of GDP at end 2018, up from around 5% at end 2017 and 16. Staff recommends settling these balances at the central bank and relying on the issuance of treasury bills for future government cash flow management. For 2 years, sir, the International Monetary Fund identified a growing and burgeoning problem involving the accumulation of an overdraft. And for the avoidance of doubt and purposes of clarity, it's important to understand what that means. That is essentially the equivalent of continuing to write checks and continuing to write checks without wanting to go to borrow legitimately, but insisting that you can continue to write checks because you feel that the central bank must honor these checks. That is essentially what happened. So when we jump up and talk about how much we love poor people, the poor people of Guyana can't write checks in an unlimited fashion, sir, like the APNU AFC government believes that they could do. The poor people of Guyana had to live within their modest and meager incomes, while the APNU AFC government apparently believed that the central bank was a bottomless pit, was a money tree that they could constantly shake. And Minister Edgell made a very important point which is worth repeating for emphasis. If any one of us, sir, on either side of the house, were to borrow some money, let us say any one of us, Minister Edgell gave some good examples. If you go to the bank and you borrow some money, you go and you demonstrate, I have a job, here's my job letter, I have an income, I can afford to pay back this loan, please give me this loan. And the bank says, yes, approved, you have a loan, $1.3 million, I think was the figure Minister Edgell cited. And of course, the bank will ask you what you want to do with that money. You take your $1.3 million loan and you probably go and you buy a car. Mr. Speaker, the incurrence of that debt of $1.3 million will be matched by an asset that you would have acquired, the motor car. If any one of us went, and if any one of these ordinary Guyanese that members on that house claim to represent and claim to champion their cause, if any one of us and anybody else, any single individual anywhere else in this country went to a bank and said, I want to take out a mortgage, I want to borrow to buy a house, they will go, they will present their transport or their certificate of title or their other collateral. The bank will do their due diligence, examine their income, their capacity to repay, and will approve their loan. And when the bank disburses that loan will be used to buy a house. There will be an asset that would have been acquired. So the individual will have a loan at the bank or the building society. And with the proceeds of that loan, they would have acquired an asset. They would have bought a house, or they would have expanded or repaired their house, and so they will have an asset. What is extremely alarming, sir, is that despite the accumulation of an overdraft of $100 billion, and despite spending in excess of $1 trillion, what is there to show, sir? What is there to show? A couple arches here and there, one on the East Bank and one on the East Coast, that in any case corporate sponsors paid for? What is there to show, sir? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And what that points to, sir, is the outrageous squandermania. The outrageous squandermania that the APNU-AFC government committed against the people of Guyana. Mind you, sir, it appears that some of them got a few bangles, bracelets, and earrings out in the process. It appears that some of them got a few bangles, bracelets, and earrings. But what did the poor people of this country that they want to claim that they're representing and championing, what do the poor people have to show for it? Mr. Speaker, a few months ago, about a year ago or so, I was walking through, Mr. Speaker, about a year ago, I was walking through Skeldon Market. Yes, I was actually. About a year ago, sir, I was walking through Skeldon Market. And, sir, as I was walking through Skeldon Market, I stopped, sir. I stopped, sir, and engaged in conversation with some of the people there. Many of them remembered me. I had been in government. They recognized me as a former minister. I stopped and I engaged in conversation with many of them. They recognized me as a former minister, sir. If you had been paying attention, you would have heard what I said. They recognized me, sir, as a former minister. And they engaged me in conversation. Sir, I recall, sir, that is what put you over there and put me here. That is what put you there and put me here. Sir, I walked through Skeldon Market, sir, and engaged in conversation. And I recall speaking with a vendor, a lady, an elderly Guyanese woman, ordinary Guyanese woman, she had a vegetable stand. She was selling bora, okra, karila, balanje, vegetables like that. And I stopped and I asked her how business was doing. And sir, she said to me with tears in her eyes, she said her husband had died in an accident. Her son had worked with Gaisuko. And was now out of work. There were tears in her eyes, sir, as she spoke of the fact that her son, no longer being worked, could no longer take care of his children, had turned to alcohol, was incapable of taking care of his children. As a result of which, she, the grandmother, was now tasked with her small, humble vegetable stand to try to sell some vegetables to feed her son and his wife and his 2 children. Except, sir, that she had a vegetable stall, the lady next to her had another vegetable stall selling the same thing, the lady opposite had a vegetable stall selling the same thing, and there was nobody to buy. Because, sir, the economy of entire communities had been destroyed as a result of a callous government, a callous government who closed the sugar industry and put thousands of people out of work. So when you come here and cry crocodile tears about poor people, do not mock the tens of thousands of poor people that you put out of work when you close the sugar industry. Go to Kanji. Why do you think that Charandas Prasad had to vote with his conscience? Why do you think he had to vote with his conscience? Go to Kanji and speak to the poor people there. Go to Albion and Port Morant and speak to the poor people there. Go to Kwakwani and speak to the poor people there who can no longer work in the bauxite industry because you caused the industry to close down. So don't come here, sir, Mr. Speaker, through you, don't come here I would say to the members on the other side, don't come here and behave like this is an amateur drama stage and cry crocodile tears for poor people. You weren't crying tears for them when you sent home nearly 10,000 sugar workers. You weren't crying for them and their families. You weren't crying when you sent home nearly 2,000 Amerindian community workers, CSOs. You weren't crying for them then when you sent them home. So don't come now and cry crocodile tears. Don't come now and pretend to be concerned about those people. The APNU AFC government does not represent any poor people in this country, didn't do so when they were in government, and are not doing so now.
Minister McCoy, you have to desist from using that as a noise amplifying equipment.
So, sir, when we come to this house and say we want to raise financing for developmental programs, we're open and transparent about it. We're open and transparent about it. We're not writing checks on the central bank because we're bullying the central bank to honor those checks. We're open and transparent about it. You want me to tell you? I'll tell you about Kanji now. In addition to going to Skeldon, sir, I went to Kanji. I went to Kanji, where Mr. Chandas Prasad was. Sir, I recall speaking with an individual who said to me, no, in Kanji, that in the space of the last week, she had been to 3 funerals. And all 3 of these funerals were for people who had committed suicide. Young men who had committed suicide. And all of them had committed suicide because they were out of work, had no income, and could not take care of their family. All 3 of them had committed suicide because they were former sugar workers. So, Mr. Speaker, it saddens me. It saddens me. It saddens me when I see members on the other side of the house come and behave here like this is an amateur theater stage and they can engage in comedy, ridiculing people, pretending to represent poor people when they don't, when they sat down and supported a government that was sending people home, closing industries, and banishing thousands of people into poverty and penury. Mr. Speaker, we have plans for developing this country. We have plans for creating jobs. We are not a government who says that job creation is not the task of the government. Go and make plantain chips and cook up rice. We are not a government that says job creation is not our business. Go and make plantain chips and cook up rice to earn a living. We are not a government, Mr. Speaker, it's very telling. I was in this house. I was in this house when a member on that side of the house said, sugar is not our problem, sugar is your problem. You all remember those words? You remember those words? You remember those words when those words were uttered? Sugar is not our problem, it's your problem. Well, I will tell you what. I will tell you what. We represent the cause of all Guyanese. All Guyanese. Sugar workers, bauxite workers, people who work in the rice fields. We represent the cause of all Guyanese. And sir, when we come with an agenda for development, and you stand and seek to obstruct that agenda for development, you cannot, with any modicum of seriousness, claim to be representing the cause of any Guyanese, poor or otherwise. And so, Mr. Speaker, I will say this. Despite inheriting an empty and bankrupt treasury. It is our intention to repair the finances of this country. It is our intention to mobilize financing for the development of our country. And it is our intention to implement development programs in this country to ensure that the lives of every single Guyanese person is improved. We are not here for drama and histrionics, sir. We're not here to jump up and pretend like members on the other side of the house. Like I said in the previous debate, beating their chests and claiming to represent this person and that person. Thumping their chests, yes. Thumping their chests as if this is a comedy. As if this is a comedy show. Knowing full well that you put people out of work and closed entire industries, and then coming here and behaving like this if this is a comedy show. This is the parliament, sir. We're supposed to be representing people's interests here. Don't come and behave like if this is a comedy show. So, sir, I will say this, sir. The People's Progressive Party civic government The People's Progressive Party civic government has always stood on the side of the people of Guyana. And we will continue to do so. And those who vote against this motion are voting against development and are voting against the people of Guyana. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, the motion is now put. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no.
No. No, 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 no.
No, no, no.
The
No.
ayes have it.
No,
No.
no,
Division.
No, no, no.
Mr. Clerk?
in Parliament.
Before I ask the clerk to start taking the division, I want to ask the operators if they can put the screen up with all of the online persons so that we can see how they vote also. So instead of doing the picture of the dome, we can put the full screen up so that we can get, yes, all of the online persons on our screen. Noting that we have this new hybrid parliament online, we want to ensure that we give people an opportunity to get online. Those who had taken a relief break could come back on. Yes, great. Mr. Clerk, you may proceed.
Mr. Schuman,
Mr. Sears, Mr. Figuera, Mr. Figuera. No. Mr. Sinclair. No. Mr. Jai Prasad. No. Mr. Jordan.
No. No.
Mr. Ramsaru.
No.
Miss Philadelphia.
No!
Mrs. Flubes.
No.
Mr. Mahipal.
No.
Mr. Holder. Mr. Holder. No. Mr. Cox. Mr. Henry.
No.
Miss Fernandez.
No.
Mr. Duncan.
Absolutely no.
Mrs. St. Louis. Mrs. Walton Desir.
No.
Mr. Raj Kumar.
No.
Mrs. Hughes.
No.
Miss McDonald. Mr. Patterson.
No.
Miss Ferguson.
No.
No.
Mr. Jones.
No.
Mrs. Shandon Edmond.
No.
Mrs. Sarabo Halley.
No.
Dr. Cummins.
No.
Dr. Henry. Dr. Henry. Mrs. Hastings Williams. Mrs. Hastings Williams.
No.
Mr. Trotman. Mr. Trotman. Mr. Ford.
No.
Mr. Ramjatan.
No.
Mr. Harmon. Mr. Harmon.
No.
Miss Veersamy.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Dr. Smith.
Yes.
Mr. Jaffer Ali. Dr. Westford.
Yes.
Dr. Ramsaran. Mrs. Pearson Fredericks. Mr. Narayan. Mr. Datadin.
Yes.
Dr. Mahadio.
Yeah.
Mr. Charlie.
Yes.
Mr. Siraj.
Aye.
Ms. Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mr. A. Prasad.
Aye.
Mr. Indar.
Yes.
Mr. McCoy.
Yes.
Ms. Parag.
Yes.
Mr. Ramson.
Yes.
Dr. V. Prasad.
Yes.
Mr. Kroll.
Yes.
Mr. Dharamlal.
Yes.
Mr. Bharat.
Yes.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yes.
Ms. Sukhai. Ms. Sukhai. Mr. Mustafa. Ms. Manik Chand. Dr. Anthony. Bishop Edgil.
Yes.
Mr. Todd.
Yes.
Mr. Shira. Mr. Nanlal.
Yes.
Mr. Jagdi Ho. Mr. Jagdiho,
Moving on.
It's not there.
move on. Mr. Phillips, Mr. Speaker, 32 members voted for the motion with 29 against.
Who's that?
Thank you very much. The motion is carried. Honorable members, we now move to the second motion. The motion confirmation of the external loans increasing of limit order 2021, number 3 of 2021. I now invite the Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance to proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated when I spoke on the previous motion, it would not be my intention to present extensive remarks on this second motion, given the close connection between the two. I therefore wish, Mr. Speaker, without any further remark, to move the motion that this National Assembly confirm the external loans increasing of limit order 2021, number 3 of 2021. I will confine my remarks to this simple moving of the motion, unless necessary, depending on how the debate progresses on this matter. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. The Honorable Member, Mr. Kiamraj Ramjatan.
Mr. Speaker, and I am going to utilize the opportunity to talk on more or less both the domestic and the external ceilings, because I didn't want to speak twice on the two motions and to do that individually and severally. Mr. Speaker, it is important for us to understand that government always will want to do borrowings, especially in the context of revenue streams that are not there and for current expenditure, and also for developmental projects that they might want to prioritize. And it is a good thing that you have a capacity to borrow. What I have a problem with is balanced budgets not being the concept that we want to support. And also allowing that kind of balanced budget arrangements to come from also not necessarily borrowings of a high order as these two ceiling levels have indicated, but also to ensure that you diversify your tax base. This is where I get the impression that the Honorable Minister and his team and the government benches want to go. I was there in the People's Progressive Party, and there was a very famous leader of that party, probably the most famous of them all, Dr. Jagan, that used to talk and condemn borrowings that used to happen in those days when he was leader of that party. I have checked on a number of his speeches, one in 1980, when he talked on the loans that were being given to Guyana stores. It is in volume 6, 1980, of his selected speech. And more than that, even at Akabe College, and Gao people would know that. See Paul Lorraine and RPA people, you do not go putting your hat where your hand can reach. And let me tell you something, the dreamy-eyed speech just given by Bishop Wanajil as to all the infrastructural works that they have will not happen if necessarily you do not have what is called these balanced arrangements, ensuring that the revenue streams come from a good mixture of borrowings and taxes and non-taxes revenues too. Look, we have a huge set of oil revenues that will be coming in. We also have done a number of legislative arrangements as to where you can now go and get the monies from, a natural resource fund. The country, because that oil is not PPP oil. Understand that? So we can go as part and parcel of an APNU AFC opposition and a PPP government to go and ensure that a revenue stream that is there, that you can go and ensure that you get the revenues to do what you want to do. And you know, I rather got embittered by what they were saying, that in the last 5 years, we ain't got nothing for show for $1.3 trillion. You got roads almost all over the place. Quarantine never had street lights. You got street lights. You got police station all over the place. You got hospitals. You got boats built. For the GDF, you got airplane come in. All of that. You got magistrates court. You got drainage and irrigation under NDIA. What's the problem with you guys? You just don't recognize nothing that happened in the 5 years? Oh my goodness. But in trying to pull wool over the eyes of people, you give the impression nothing was done, and then you come and you say that you go to Skeldon Market and one poor room when they're selling vegetables. Well, I've been to Skeldon Market too. And that Skeldon community was telling me that that big white elephant that they made and they spent $200 million for. Me no want me picnic or cut cane. Plenty of them are telling you that the next generation of those communities must not be cutting cane. But you know, That is exactly what it would appear that they want. Members in the government benches, pour more money into Gaisuko, which has already proven to be so unprofitable. Bring in all kinds of experts, right down to Sis Ryan and all of them. Experts in inverted commas. Yes. I hear Jagdir Escali a false name. You know, Mr. Speaker, I could go anywhere in this country and hear what people are saying about this government. And I was only recently up there, and people are saying all of this kind of spendings that they're doing in relation to the sugar industry, and especially when the price is almost half of our production cost. What do you want to borrow for? Put more money into bad money? Bad investments? And that is why I'm saying that it is necessary that we look at the past to understand why we are going to give a carte blanche to this minister, knowing what transpired before. They take a lot of money, $5 million for some specialty engineer for the specialty hospital. The man run away with the money. You remember that? All the Clico investments money gone down the drain. We had a number of projects that failed miserably. And it is not as if we wanted it that way. Sometimes these things happen because we did not put the priorities right. We were not testing them with feasibility studies. We were not doing the pre-conditional arrangements to ensure that the money is well spent. And now to come and to say that you would like to have a carte blanche because of the dreamy-eyed kind of Bishop Edgehill desires. We want road here, we're going to get railway here. Look, by the time I hear that fella, that honorable member, you want to know if Guyana is going to be like a Hong Kong or Dubai. No, but it is not going to be real. We have to deal with development in an incremental way. We have always spoken about that. And you just can't go and you know what? We also have to understand that we will have a capacity that if things go wrong with revenue stream, how come the future generations going to pay for this thing? That same Dr. Jagan that trained all of them over there, or most of them, former president of this country and famous leader, used to say that when you borrow, you're giving the future generations via taxes to pay the money. That is what he used to tell us. So we must ensure that what we can earn today, if we are earning, how much you're earning? $1 million? That you are going to now know that that is what you will spend on the variety of activities that are expenditures in your lifestyle. Mr. Speaker, that was something that the Alliance for Change APNU government did over the last 5 years. It did not seek to increase this kind of thing to $600 million and then $500 million. The trouble is that you couldn't go that way because you would have found yourselves in bigger trouble. And that is why we held back. But now because you got the oil revenues coming in, instead of taking that which is a portion of the revenues as we have worked it out in relation to petroleum funds, do whatever will come via taxation, do whatever will come via levies on whatever else that we have, and so on, and a certain set of borrowings, and we can go on with doing the developmental works. What is it that they would want to now go with for $500 million, $1 billion? It's what, 500 billion. And then another big set increase by about 250 billion for the domestic. Mr. Speaker, we had the brunt of a very big public relations war that the PPP, whilst in opposition, put on us. And it was the mantra that what the APNU AFC government doing is tax and spend, tax and spend. I will come to that just now. What they want to do here is borrow and spend and let the future generations got to pay through taxes. They must understand that you can't just go and willy-nilly in a two-paragraph arrangement say that this thing is for the debts that you incurred and also the development works that we want. How much debts did we incur that will categorize this thing to that very high level? And it is not, because look, I understand that in 8-9 months you've been in government, or whatever it is, 6 months, your deficit in the last budget was $75 billion. Yes, that was your borrowing that can fund your 2020 budget. And in 5 years, we had $92 billion as the debt. 5 years, $92 billion, because there was tremendous self-restraint as to how you do this borrowing. And I must say, and give kudos and accolades to Mr. Winston Jordan for doing that. And that is a page, that back page of the budget speech that was done here by Mr. Wanajil. It is all there. He didn't want to come. Mr. Speaker, external debt too can rise back to the very high levels of the early 1990s if we don't watch what we're doing. Well, whatever the government, but if you are human too, you could make the mistakes and also get that thing going higher and higher still. And then we got to go and beg the Paris people and what you call the Paris arrangements and all of that. No, this is wrong. This is completely wrong. Whenever we want to raise ceilings, we got to do it extraordinarily conservatively rather than liberally like we have here. And it is important that we appreciate that things can go wrong. The tremendous confidence that is creating this liberal attitude is as a result of that, the fact that we got oil. And this year we got some monies coming in. Last year we got some monies coming in. But don't put all your chickens in that one place. Because of the fact that oil prices could come down, it could also have huge competition from a number of other resources like the solar and the wind and the whatever else that are called renewables. And it is important then that assuming we start giving a carte blanche to a Minister of Finance who had seen bad things in relation to investments with Clico, Marriott, Skeldon Estate, the specialty hospital. That is what I can recall now, but there were others. We have to ensure that we are far more conservative in our approach in handing out this kind of huge increases in our limits. No, it can't be done. It cannot be done. And I am urging that notwithstanding all the fantastic projects that they're saying that they're going to put on stream, infrastructural works, and so on, can be very dangerous indeed. I had quoted in a previous budget speech that this thing about infrastructural works, and I quoted from the author, he wrote the book, The Bottom Billion, Paul Collier, and he said, and he came here early in 2016, And he indicated that these contracts for infrastructural work, rule of thumb, got a lot of corruption behind them. Plenty. And especially when they're being guaranteed, and they're also going to be probably funded by monies from the public coffers. Big time. And that is what happened at Skeldon. The biggest set of money ever that was spent on any one single project, that sugar factory, and it went right down. And don't let wool be pulled in our eyes by the thing that we were the ones that caused that to happen at Skeldon. No. Skeldon started after you had problems with European Union. And then Mr. Jagde was president, indicated that he would put up a big factory that's going to be so efficient. What did the thing turn out to be? Not only a white elephant, it turned out to be a dead elephant. And now you don't put the blame on us that we are the ones that caused this little lady now selling vegetables. Because I want you to understand too, Mr. Speaker, and members over there, that it is important that things can happen and go very wrong. And we must ensure that we do not allow that kind of because you know what? Assuming oil does not do that well, in 20 years from now, when you got to pay back whatever debt is piling up, you know who's going to pay the debt? Is those who are taxpayers on the books. In Guyana here, the taxpayers on the books are generally public servants. Public servants. A lot of those that are avoiders and evaders, they got big house. But when you go and ask them as to where they got the resources, the revenues and so on, they don't want to say. It is a non-declaration. And lots of them, we know, are trying as best as possible to avoid and evade. So we have to be very, very concerned about that. We had a report done, I remember, a CARTAC report, which indicated that broadening the tax base is important. And when they indicate here that we did 100 extra taxes, Mr. Speaker, it was not 100 new taxes or any such thing. It was taxes that were in the books. But because they had 1955 rates, because they had 1964 rates and all of that, you put on the present day rates in relation to the licensing requirement and whatever it is for the dollar value, and that is what happened. And all of them, we got the brunt of it, I must tell you, because of their public relations. We put tax on our scarf, we put tax on this, and we put tax on that. But they were all there. Mr. Speaker, and they will want to be critical of that. But you must understand too, that when the value-added tax came into being, that same government had a windfall because it was not supposed to be 16% to equalize with what you are bringing in through the other taxes that it came to replace. You know, and they made a windfall, but did they utilize it properly? One side of all kinds of mischief went on that we knew about. And that is why they were very much criticized by the press and a whole lot of people all around the place as to what they did. Mr. Speaker, we have a number of projects that we would want to do. As a country, you would want to ensure that there are lots more agricultural schemes. MMA is supposed to get another phase 2 or a phase 3 that will ensure That is what we were thinking about that we will do. From the bishop, he was talking about all these infrastructural works. Mr. Speaker, if you're going to fix them, you have to have also investors that will want to come. There are other things that can ensure development projects done. The Honorable Minister did mention them. You can also ask people to come with the monies in a kind of an arrangement where they will then charge a toll and pay themselves back and so on. And I am telling these members here that is what my scare is, my fright is. The thing is too high. I remember they came in relation to Amila Falls to guarantee some loan to the tune of, I don't know, 150 billion, and we then brought it down to 50. We didn't have anything after that. One project, so much money, and then Site Global went away after that. How do we know that if you give this minister all of this heightened capacity, widened capacity, bigger capacity, that we might not very well get things going wrong? It is good that he could come here whenever he wants. If he's on to a project of a road and a railway from Lethem to Georgetown, well, fine. Let us see the project. Let's see the feasibility. And if he wants, because of the fact that he must get a guarantee for that project, as Cherry used to teach us, let's do that for that project. But, they don't want me to call his name because a lot of his arguments could counter what they're coming with now, just like what he did in relation to the stores, that same Main Street store. Mr. Speaker, it is very, very important because that could be done that way. And so we, at a national level, can all come behind whatever the project is. But we cannot do that at this stage. I see that my time might be up. I want to say, those are the things that scare me. Mr. Speaker, it also will address the discipline that must be with the Ministry of Finance in relation to coming with balanced budgets. Balanced budgets is what we must come here with. Your first budget in the first 5 months, 76 billion. How much is it? $75 billion in deficit. And it came so late. It came so late. I am certain that a lot of the projects can't be done before, and it is very ill-advised, Mr. Speaker, that they're going to do that. I understand as of 2nd of August 2020 to last week, the government borrowed in the vicinity of almost $215 million US. I'm trying to verify this. And then they have a $34 billion US project in line for the energy sector. I could understand the energy sector. But when you have so much things coming so fast at you via borrowings, and we have prudent businessmen across there that understand that you can't do that. Mr. Speaker, I am urging that these be reduced by half because they could still take care of the debts that have been incurred.
Minister Ramsey.
Mr. Speaker, you made a rule about people wearing their masks while they're speaking.
What happened? You don't want to hear me clearly?
Thank you, Minister.
All right, Mr. Speaker, I feel a little uncomfortable with it on, but in any event, While speaking here, I think I'm keeping my social distance. But it's all right. Young Mr. Ramsden would like me to put it on. But I would wish to close on that point and to urge that this very wide gap not be granted. It should be, and I'm less than that, that can take care of the actual debt that we have. Because I knew in the last 5 years, Mr. Jordan did his best to reduce it. And it is important that we go there, not to utilize the fact that we got some confidence in oil and all of that now, that we're going to go way, way above. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Honorable Member, Minister Bishop One Edgehill.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Will have sufficed, and everyone who wanted to express a view would have viewed that should the pieces two matters are extremely similar. But listening to my colleague, the Honorable Mr. Ramtatan, I think some things are missing. If, for the sake of argument, Mr. Speaker, he agrees that, and I don't agree, but he supposes that we on this side of the House, including my colleague, Dr. Ashley Singh, would be reckless where borrowing is concerned. When you go to an international financial institution, that recklessness would be put in check. You'll be unable to draw down a dime because they will have to ascertain your level of indebtedness as it relates to the size of your economy, your level of indebtedness as it relates to your capacity to generate income, your long-term projections and the sectors that are bringing in revenue, before they even give you a dime. Mr. Ramjatan will be familiar with a term, conditionalities for the forced disbursement. You have to meet certain criteria. So, Mr. Ramjatan, every time you make that argument about us being able to borrow, it is an admission that the international financial institutions have confidence in the PPPC's administration and management of the country, and they are prepared to lend us money for Guyana's development. So every time I learned, experience, wise friend, Dr. Singh, sits and negotiates and have his technicians fine-tune developmental dollars to come to Guyana. And we get it. It is a vote of confidence. Mr. Speaker, and I know you're a well-experienced man in the area of finance and economics. You will know, Mr. Speaker, a lot of the institutions accompanying loans and grants are what is called technical cooperation. And they use that for institutional strengthening and capacity building. Because if our people were only able to manage 400 billion, and you're now managing 600 billion, the capacity for management monitoring, evaluation, controls, checks, and balances must be increased. So accompanying the loans are oftentimes capacity building and institutional strengthening. It would appear that what we have here is a sour grape attitude. We didn't get to do it. Nobody else must do it. But nothing was stopping you from doing it. It was a lack of vision. It was a lack of leadership. It was a lack of capacity. It was a lack of the ability to manage. Mr. Speaker, today happens to be the 4th of February, and it's just 6 months. It is just 6 months since the PPPC was in office. And I want to demonstrate to the Honorable Member Ramjatan the capacity of the PPPC. We left government in 2015, and at that time, the then President Ramatar had negotiated, secured a 50 million US line of credit from the government of India for the building of a road that was envisaged by now President Dr. Irfan Ali while he was the Minister of Housing to connect the back. We had 10 million and 8 million in loan and grant for a ferry to go to Region 1. We had monies available for the development of renewable energy. Mr. Speaker, 5 years after we came to government, everything that was left was still parked. Nothing was done. What was supposed to cost 50 million was increased to 208 million. So no monies were disbursed. You know what we did? Yes, by the same financial whiz and Caribbean economist and specialist, Dr. Bar Jagdeo, that some of you have problems with because of his ability to lead, negotiate, and manage. Sat with the President, the Minister of Public Works, and my colleague, the Minister within the ministry, Honorable Deodat Indar, and engaged the Indian government to the extent that the Indian government worked even on Indian Independence Day. That was a level of energy and excitement that on a public holiday in India, the government was working with the government of Guyana to get on the road development, financing, and reprogramming. That's the reality. The money was available, but they lacked the capacity, the wherewithal to do it. We made the point earlier. We don't borrow to eat. We don't borrow to drink. When we borrow, we have assets to show value. Value. We borrow to invest. We borrow to create opportunities. We borrow to open up new opportunities. Mr. Speaker, I heard a lot of fluff about Skelder. and how much money was borrowed and still there. Part of the problem why we are here tonight with the earlier bill was the borrowing by the then finance minister, 30 billion, supposedly for Gaisuku. And where is Gaisuku when we took it? 30 billion to revive for Gaisuku. And the pro-poor government that they claim they were sent home 7,000 sugar workers, close estates, and punish people because of political reasons. That's what they did. Compare that to the PPPC in government. How we treated bauxite. When we got into government, the company who was managing was prepared to hand over for $1 and walk away. Yes, the same Barra Jaglio that you have a problem with used his intellectual prowess and negotiating skill, retooled the workers of Linden, brought in investments, sale bauxite. We got Bosai succeeding from Oh My Gold, Rusal, and now under your tenure, Rusal gone, Olenov gone. You have the Midas touch. Everything you touch, you destroy. That is the reality. So, Mr. Speaker, while I heard my friend, Mr. Ramjatan, it would appear that in the developmental studio, the only button he knows to press is pause. But we on this side of the house, we are pressing the button that says play and let the progress continue. Let the real progress continue. Mr. Speaker, my brief intervention in joining this debate is again to lend support to my colleague and to support the government's initiative to give us the latitude, the capacity, the scope to be able to present ourselves with a legal architecture that we could engage for Guyana's development and modernization. Look what has happened. We just had the U.S. Exim Bank came here and visited, spoke to the private sector, and told them how much money they have available to lend. The Canadian Commercial Corporation, they are ready to engage with Guyana. We had the visit from the Sheikh from Dubai. They want investment in Guyana. We got people coming from all parts of the world, whether it's in renewable energy, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in forestry, whether it's in oil and gas, manufacturing. The Minister of Tourism will tell you 30 expressions of interest. 30 international brands express interest of building hotels in Guyana. Every time those things happen, international people, Fortune 500 companies, governments, institutions that manage large amounts of money are breathing and saying, we have confidence in Guyana, we want to work with Guyana. And may I say as I close, Mr. Ramjatan, through Mr. Speaker, by no means the PPPC is claiming to be perfect. But one thing I can say, we have been good for Guyana. We have been good for Guyana. Everything didn't come out 100% perfect, but the only person who never fall off a bicycle is the man who never ride. The only lady who never get burned in her kitchen is the one who never cook. The only government who never had a challenge in a project is a government that did nothing, and that is the APNU AFC. Mr. Speaker, at this late hour, where I know there's lots of excitement, I don't want to prolong this, but I'm saying, take notice, Guyana. The people who came to you and told you let the progress continue, the people who came to you and told you they won the elections, the people who held this country up for 5 months, by their actions of going against this bill, they want to hold up Guyana for 5 years. But we on this side will not allow it to happen, because we have the determination, we have the vision, and we have the support of the people, and we have the backing of the world. Do what is right for Guyana and support this motion and let the progress continue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
And thank you very much, Honorable Minister. The Honorable Member, Mr. Jermaine Figueroa.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I really tried to pay attention to the Honorable Bishop's presentation. And I conclude, Mr. Speaker, that he was really trying to impress the Honorable Minister of Finance. After all, Mr. Speaker, that was his dream job. But I really focus my attention on the real Minister of Finance, Dr. Singh, because his views are the views that I believe are important in this debate, most particularly. So, Mr. Speaker, permit me to lend a viewpoint on Order 3 of 2021, which addresses the increasing of the external debt ceiling. An act, Mr. Speaker, which provides for a maximum value of debt, which can be contracted by the government from external sources. The proposed amendments aimed at increasing the loan limit from $400 billion to $650 billion, a startling increase of $250 billion is indeed worrisome and should be a matter of concern, Mr. Speaker, for all taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, irrespective if it's internal or external, debt, Mr. Speaker, is the contracting of resources to be repaid in the future. It has to be repaid some way, somehow, with or without interest. Someone has to pay the bill, and it is usually placed, Mr. Speaker, on the backs of taxpayers, teachers, policemen and women, doctors, nurses, sugar workers, Mr. Speaker. All public servants, Mr. Speaker, will have to contribute towards paying this debt. Mr. Speaker, I will not stand here and say to this House that the government must not or should not borrow monies for developmental projects and other developmental pursuits. No, I will not. I unreservedly have no difficulty in government borrowing, because our history informs us that since independence, successive governments have never run a balanced budget. We have always had a deficit budget. What is important, Mr. Speaker, is to make sure that our domestic savings are progressively increased, which will provide a means for the country to cover its current expenditure and aid in the development expenditure. Throughout our history, we have not been able to finance developmental expenditure from our national budget fully, which gives rise to us having to borrow locally and internationally. Mr. Speaker, it is without saying, we do recognize the need for which government is borrowing. The new limit proposed is a clear indication of the level of borrowing that will be undertaken in the next year, in the next coming years, Mr. Speaker. That is scary and would be a matter of concern for all Guyanese. And I'll tell you why, Mr. Speaker. The nature of borrowing has evolved, and during its evolution, countries like Guyana would have benefited from soft term measures, such as long maturity periods of 30 to 40 years, grace periods of 10 to 15 years, low or no interest rates, etc. But in recent times, Guyana has graduated, so to speak, from the soft windows of various multilateral financing institutions. Already, we have graduated from soft loans of the IMF, Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility, PRGF, and that is from 2019, Mr. Speaker. Additionally, the IDB provides Guyana with a blended lending portfolio, which is a mix of hard interest rate with soft interest rate, but it is increasingly bending closer to a high interest rate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the above stated is one of the scary things about wanting to borrow now compared 10 years ago. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the limiting of how much Guyana will be allowed to borrow from multilateral sources. As our, as our per capita GDP increases, we would have graduated not only from the soft window, but even the hard windows as well. And an example right here in the region is Barbados, who no longer can borrow from the World Bank because their per capita income is too high. So their option now is to go to capital markets to borrow, where the interest rates is mutable, coupled with other conditions. Mr. Speaker, so what that means, when we are pushed out of the multilateral lending windows to borrow loans that are harder, it makes the debt burden increasing, it makes the debt burden increase, Mr. Speaker, rapidly. My question to the Minister with responsibility for finance is why a request for such an increase? Why a request, Mr. Speaker, for an increase of such massive proportions? $250 billion. Can the Honorable Minister inform the House what will these borrowing be against? Because in my mind, Mr. Speaker, all these monies that government is borrowing and intends to borrow in the future clearly shows that it is being borrowed against future earnings from petroleum. Mr. Speaker, when one looks at our balance of payments, with the exception of petroleum proceeds, none of the other areas, none of the other sectors, Mr. Speaker, can provide the kind of foreign currency earnings to accommodate or facilitate this kind of borrowing. Mr. Speaker, this very high appetite and unquestionable desire to borrow brings into question the government's proclivity for questionable spending. Mr. Speaker, Order 3 of 2021, though not averse to logic in principle, we on this side are terribly worried for the Guyanese people, and in particular for future generations. Mr. Speaker, it is said that a good father leaves an inheritance for his children. This government, Mr. Speaker, and the intended purpose of this ceiling will leave the generations to come with serious debt, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the country was regaled by the PPP about the borrowing of the coalition government, which had an external loan portfolio of about 462 million US at budget 2019. Important to note that the external debt was on the decline, and the country had even managed to close its debt with Trinidad in the last 5 years. However, what is important to this debate is the quantum of the increase being sought for developmental services. Mr. Speaker, one must pay cognizance to the PPP's history with big developmental projects without feasibility studies. Now we are hearing about a bridge across the river, 4-lane roads, etc. Mr. Speaker, where are the feasibility studies for the proposed 4-lane road or the bridge across the Demawar River at the point where they want to put it? It is irresponsible actions like these with large loans, which become large failures like Skeldon Estate, the fiber optic cables from Brazil, the Marriott, etc. These so-called developmental projects that leave the country in huge debt. Millions of US dollars are still being paid on the backs of taxpayers for the costly errors and mistakes of this current government. Mr. Speaker, we should learn from our past or even from our neighbors next door. Suriname, who had embarked on several major developmental projects, building some 3 bridges across several um, across several rivers, only to run broke soon after those investments, leaving the country in an economic mess. Mr. Speaker, this House is being asked to up the limit by 250 billion at a time when a 5-month-old delinquent government whose recklessness had ratcheted up an external debt of about 250 million US from August 2020 to February 2021. This is around 54 billion Guyana dollars in 5 months. Mr. Speaker, in light of this disappointing reality, I'm informed that the government is engaging in talks with the IMF for further loans, all of which are given against earnings from oil. What is troubling, Mr. Speaker, is the rate of borrowing as may be allowed by this amendment. The apprehension on this side, Mr. Speaker, takes note of the character of borrowing, which is moving more in the region of higher interest rates over shorter periods as Guyana's GDP improves with earnings from oil to a middle income country. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, one has to be mindful of the trend unfolding as part of the PPP's macro policy, where the finance minister speaks to the issue of the debt of the Dutch disease in accounting terms, thus sidestepping the merits of contracting economic costs against accounting costs. Mr. Speaker, the above evidence in the PPP's posture on sugar, where they make a loss in US dollars in each market that Guyana sugar is sold, but the PPP continues to put billions into Gaisuku. Billions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when one looks at the developmental projects proposed, it is important to ask again, where are the feasibility studies, Mr. Speaker? It is these slash spending that is troubling, that will usher in the Dutch disease, Mr. Minister. Not all projects that appear socially and technically sound is economically feasible. Gaisuko is a case in point. Mr. Speaker, all the oil economies are in a race to extract as much oil as quickly as possible because the world is on a course to reduce its reliance on fossil fuel. and an increase in the use of electric vehicles and alternative energy. So when this happens, Mr. Speaker, who would subsidize Gaisuku? Who would pay for those borrowed loans if not the future generations? In fact, Mr. Speaker, the PPP presently punishes public servants in keeping Gaisuku in a convalescent state. Mr. Speaker, the returns on this type of borrowing as proposed in Order 3 of 2021 is only spoken of in present terms by this government. We are never told what future generations will have to go through. Look at the management of COVID with all of the US billions that this government borrowed thus far. We have increased debts, chatter about increased testing, and disjointed message on prevention. Mr. Speaker, the government pays for advertisement speaking about social distancing of 3 meters, but then tell minibuses to have passengers seated inches apart. Mr. Speaker, I do support the need for responsible borrowing and developmental projects that are informed by studies and public consultations with the people who will have to pay for those said loans for those very projects, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, this proposed amendment, with the audacious ambition of raising the debt ceiling by $250 billion, that will add additional hardship on our taxpayers. I cannot support in good conscience, Mr. Speaker. So, in conclusion, I therefore call on the Honorable Minister to be magnanimous and amend this request to $150 billion. That is a number we are prepared to consider and even support. With those few words, Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashley Singh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I had stated when we spoke on the previous motion, it was indeed not my expectation that we would be repeating the debate or indeed having another extensive debate on this second motion. Be that as it may, it was nevertheless very interesting to listen to the arguments made by our colleagues on that side of the House. And indeed, sir, many of the arguments that were offered were very revealing in many respects. Much was said, sir, about borrowing policy and us borrowing and or seeking to raise the ceiling for the purposes of borrowing. But of course, and I don't believe anybody would doubt that inherently and intrinsically there's nothing wrong with borrowing. Each one of us in our private capacities would have borrowed in one shape or form at one point in time or another, whether it is to buy a car, whether it is to build a home, whether it is to purchase something on credit or on hire purchase. Each one of us would have borrowed. I'll tell you one thing, I didn't borrow from the UG Student Society. I'll tell you one thing, I didn't borrow from the UG Student Society. So, sir, inherently and intrinsically, I don't believe that there's any disagreement across the House on the question of borrowing. We have been extremely careful, sir, throughout all of the time that we have served in office to ensure that we borrow responsibly and carefully, to ensure that the quality of debt that we contract is consistent with long-term, medium and long-term debt sustainability. And you might ask why this matters. You might ask why this matters. It matters because when you examine how debt impacts on your fiscal position and your capacity to repay, the quality of debt makes a huge difference. If you borrow at favorable terms, that is to say, with long maturity, a long period to repay, and favorable interest rates, then your capacity to repay that debt is considerably greater than if you borrow more expensive, shorter terms. And throughout all of our time in office, we've been careful to borrow and invest in projects that would ensure that we would be able to repay. Compare and contrast that, sir, with the track record of the APNU AFC in government. And I will give one example, which I think will make the point, illustrate. You know, Mr. Speaker, a lot is said about this NISIL bond. A lot is said about this NISIL bond. It's well aware, I think, Minister Edgell, Honorable Minister Edgell, spoke of the fact that a bond, a NISIL bond, was raised by the APNU AFC to the tune of 30 billion Guyana dollars, of which $17.5 billion is drawn down. Now, on the surface, that might seem unremarkable. Examine, sir, more closely the terms of this transaction. I don't know how many people know the interest rate at which that $30 billion bond was contracted. I don't know how many persons know the interest rate at which that bond was contracted. Mr. Speaker, that notorious NISIL bond was contracted at a staggering interest rate of 4.75%. At a time, sir, when the government of Guyana, even the APNU AFC government of Guyana, was capable of borrowing at 1% or less. And you have to ask yourself, who was the beneficiary? Mr. Speaker, do you know, sir, and I know, Mr. Speaker, that you would know, but for the purposes of elucidation of this point, 4.75% of 17 billion is $808 million in interest alone. Per annum. Per annum. Having drawn down $17 billion, 4.75% of interest would have cost and did cost in excess of $800 million in interest costs alone. Costs that the people of Guyana today are straddled with. Mr. Speaker, sir, that is the legacy. That is the legacy of the APNU AFC government. And I will tell you what, to ensure to ensure that those who concluded this transaction will profit from it, there is a clause that says the government can't repay it early. So you are locked in to pay this 4.75%. And so, Mr. Speaker, it's very easy to come here and to engage in all sorts of glib talk. It's very easy to come here and engage in all manner of glib talk, when in fact that is the legacy, that is the sordid legacy. That is the sordid legacy of the APNU AFC during their time in office. That is what they left for the people of Guyana to be straddled with. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member, Mr. Ramjatan, spoke. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member, Mr. Ramjatan, spoke of not putting all of your eggs in one basket. Rightly and correctly so. Rightly and correctly so. And we couldn't agree more. It would be important not to put all of your eggs in one basket. But, Mr. Speaker, if you scrutinize all of the policy pronouncements that were made by the APNU AFC during their 5 years in office, their sole economic policy was to wait for oil to happen. Nothing else mattered, sir. Nothing else mattered. Sugar did not matter. Sugar was closed down. Rice did not matter. Bauxite did not matter. Other agriculture did not matter. Nothing mattered, sir. All that mattered, the sole economic policy of the APNU AFC in government, was to wait for oil to happen. Mr. Speaker, in contrast, we in the PPPC government have constantly emphasized the importance of a diversified economy. We have constantly emphasized the importance of a strong non-oil economy. We have constantly emphasized the importance of agriculture and of tourism and of services. We have constantly invested to ensure that the potential of those sectors is unleashed and unlocked. And so, sir, when the Honourable Member speaks of not putting all of one's eggs in one basket, we agree. But we believe not only to say these words and utter these words because they sound good. We believe in demonstrating by our actions, and all of our actions point to a conviction that we must ensure that the Guyanese economy is sufficiently diversified. Let us take sugar. Let us take sugar. You know, a lot of talk is being bandied around about sugar. You just have to turn, Mr. Speaker, to the 2016 budget speech, when the APNU AFC government, on the basis of sugar production in that year, in 2015, and on the basis, in fact, of the very Skeldon factories that they like to speak about, boasted about a recovery in sugar. Boasted about a recovery in sugar on the backs of the work that we had done. On the backs of the work that we had done to ensure that sugar production was maintained at an acceptable level. Boasted. And then promptly, as a result of their neglect, the sugar industry collapsed thereafter. Notwithstanding, sir, notwithstanding the tremendous contribution and role that that industry plays in sustaining entire communities, in providing important infrastructural services. It's easy to talk about sugar or gaisuko in simplistic terms. contemplate for a moment the billions of dollars that Gaisuco invested over the years of its operation in drainage and irrigation. Drainage and irrigation that benefited the entire agriculture. Consider the community services that were provided, whether medical, the indirect benefits to suppliers and service providers, the hundreds and thousands of people who benefited through the village economy, from the incomes that were generated in sugar. And so, sir, it's very easy for the APNU AFC, our colleagues on that side of the House, to come and speak in simplistic terms on these matters. But by their actions to close sugar, by their actions to create a hostile environment for investors in every industry, including bauxite, and in so many others, causing investors to leave this country, or causing investors to withhold their investments, by their very actions, sir, they displayed that they, in fact, are the ones who were putting all of their eggs in one basket. I believe, sir, it was the Honorable Minister Edgell who spoke about cutting off one's nose to spite one's face. And if you consider the APNU AFC's track record, sir, you know what that track record involves? Frustrating development in this country for narrow political objectives. Take one example. They like to speak about Amila Falls. Mr. Speaker, had they not obstructed Amila Falls today, the Amila Falls hydropower project would be producing power. Today it would have been producing power. And I hasten to add, sir, that private investors, credible, large, international, institutional investors, signaled explicitly their interest in participating in the Amila Falls project. And despite this, for the sole reason that the APNU AFC did not want Amila Falls to happen, because they didn't want the PPP to get credit for delivering hydropower to the people of Guyana, they frustrated and blocked and terminated that project. Today, sir, had they not blocked Amila, that plant would have been generating electricity and supplying to the entire grid. Sir, and that is only one example. Today, by virtue of the position that they take, wanting to frustrate an application to create room for borrowing for the purposes of financing development, this is but the latest example of what the Honorable Minister Edgell quite rightly described as cutting off one's nose to spite one's face. But I'll tell you what, the people of Guyana are not as naive as you might think. They demonstrated that on the 2nd of March. The people of Guyana are not as naive as you might think. They are watching. They know who stood by them over the years. They know who advanced the progressive development agenda. They know who obstructed and frustrated progress. Minister Edgell spoke about all of the projects that we left in 2015 and came back in 2020 to find unimplemented. Because the priority was not to implement developmental projects. The priority was to parade around and enjoy the pomp and ceremony associated with being in government that the APNUFC so greatly loves. That was the priority, not to implement projects and deliver development outcomes to people. Sir, there isn't a single project. There isn't a, well, perhaps the roundabout. The roundabout and two arches. With the exception of the Vicenjan Road roundabout and two arches. Oh yes, of course. How could we forget the Durban Park project? Sir, with the exception of the Durban Park project, two arches and a roundabout. There isn't a single developmental project that the APNU AFC can point as their own initiative. And I say so, sir, with no fear of contradiction. But Mr. Speaker, like I said, the people of Guyana know better. The people of Guyana know better. And that is why, sir, the people of Guyana spoke in the way that they did on the 2nd of March, 2020. We have outlined a development agenda, and much has been said about it already. We are firmly committed to implementing it, and we are firmly committed to implementing it in a manner that will preserve the sustainability of the public finances. And this is the reason, sir, that these two motions are before this House. I wish, sir, once again to call on my colleagues on that side of the House to reconsider their ill-founded arguments and decide when the vote is called whether they want to stand with the people of Guyana in advancing development or whether they want to obstruct development in their vote today, because that's what the vote that's the vote that we're taking. The vote that we're taking this evening, sir, is whether we want to vote in favor of development or vote against development. That's the vote that we're taking. And with those remarks, sir, I once again commend the external loans increasing of limit order 2021, number 3 of 2021, and I move that this assembly, in accordance with section 3.7 of the External Loans Act, chapter 7408 of the laws of Guyana, confirm this external loans increasing of limit order 2021. And I so move, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. The motion having been proposed and contributed to, I will now put the question. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those against the motion, please say no.
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 Division.
Division. Honorable member, Honorable Division Bell, please. We'll just give the persons online an opportunity to get in position too. Mr. Isaacs, you may proceed.
Mr. Schumann? Mr. Sears?
No.
Mr. Figuera?
No.
Mr. Sinclair?
No.
Mr. Jai Prashad?
No.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Ramsarup?
No.
Miss Philadelphia?
No.
Mistress Flubes?
No.
Mr. Mahipal? Mr. Mahipal?
No.
Mr. Holder?
No.
Mr. Cox?
No.
Mr. Henry?
No.
Miss Finance?
No.
Mr. Duncan?
No.
Mrs. Singh Lewis? Mrs. Walton this year?
No.
Mr. Raj Kumar?
No.
Mrs. Hughes?
No.
Miss McDonald? Miss McDonald? Mr. Patterson? Mr. Patterson? Miss Ferguson?
No. No.
Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Chandon Edmond?
No.
Mr. Robo Ali?
No.
Dr. Cummins?
No.
Dr. Henry?
No.
Mrs. Hastings Williams?
No.
Mr. Trotman? Mr. Trotman? Mr. Ford?
Mr. Trotman said no.
Order. Thank you. Mr. Ford?
No.
Mr. Ramjatan?
No.
Mr. Harmon? Mr. Harmon?
He's trying to unmute his mic.
Mr. Harmon? Ms. Veersamy?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Dr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Jaffer Ali?
Yes.
Dr. Westford? Mr. Dr. Ramsaran? Mr. Pearson Fredericks?
No. Yes.
Mr. Narayan?
Yes.
Mr. Datadin?
Yes.
Dr. Mahadio?
Yeah.
Mr. Charlie?
Yes.
Mr. Siraj? Mr. Drix?
Yes.
Mr. A. Prasad?
Yes.
Mr. Indar?
Yes.
Mr. McCoy? Ms. Parag?
Yes.
Mr. Ramsong?
Yes.
Dr. V. Prasad?
Yes.
Mr. Kroll?
Yes.
Mr. Dharam Lal?
Yes.
Mr. Bharat?
Yes.
Mr. Hamilton?
Yes.
Ms. Sukai? Ms. Sukai? Mr. Mustafa? Ms. Manichan? Dr. Anthony?
Yes.
Bishop Edgil?
Yes.
Mr. Todd?
Yes.
Mr. Shearer?
Yes.
Mr. Nanlao?
Yes.
Mr. Jaglio? Mr. Jaglio?
He's
Mr.
not here.
Phillips. Mr. Phillips.
Yes. Always.
Mr. Speaker, 32 members voted for the motion, with 29 against.
The motion is carried. Honorable Prime Minister,
Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of the Assembly to Thursday, February 11, 2021 at 10 a.m.
thank you, Honorable Minister. Before I formally adjourn the Assembly, two announcements to remind honorable members of the training that the clerk and the staff of the Parliament will amendments be extended to complete the debate. Honorable members, this is a good time to take the adjournment. The Assembly stands adjourned to February 11th at 10 a.m. Thank you.